Howdy, everyone. Welcome to the series Viewing Multidimensional Poverty from Many Angles, which is coming to you today from Oxford University in Oxford, UK, from the George Washington University in Washington, DC, and the United Nations in New York City. I'm James Foster, Oliver T. Carr Professor of International Affairs and Professor of Economics at GW. Today, I'm representing the Institute for International Economic Policy, or IIEP, which as always is producing the online version of today's event. Thank you, Kyle and Natalie, for taking care of business. Our usual master of ceremonies, Jacob Dirksen of the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, is traveling. So I will be representing OPHI as well during today's event, since I'm also an affiliate of OPHI. Today in Oxford, we have Kellyanne on the ground, controlling things. How are things going over there in Oxford? Is it all right?
Yes, things are well. Thank you, James. Unfortunately, our video isn't working today, but we will participate in asking questions vocally.
Fantastic. Well, you will be saved the difficulty of having to look at me for a long period of time in the introduction. So this is so wonderful. All right. Well, let's get the program going. And what a program it is. Today, Yu-Chieh, statistics analyst at the Human Development Report Office, has her doctorate from Carnegie Mellon, and Tasneem Mirza, who is a member of the research and writing team for the Human Development Report and the Multidimensional Poverty Index report, which we heard in this series just a short while back. She completed her PhD at Purdue University in the great Midwest, where I spent a full decade of my life. So Yu-Chieh and Tasneem will cover salient points from the 2022 Human Development Report, which is entitled Uncertain Times, Unsettled Lives Shaping Our Future in a Transforming World. As I recall, IIEP's very own distinguished scholar, Sunil Sharma, wrote a background paper for this report. So we eagerly await your presentation. Now, before we start the formal presentation, I understand there's a 2-minute background video, so I'll turn it over to Natalie.
The last 2 years have had a devastating impact for billions of people around the world. And for the first time, human development has declined for 9 out of 10 countries around the world. These challenges are hitting us at the same time and interacting to create new threats and make us feel insecure, unsafe, and untrusting of each other. This is the world today, in which we know what obstacles we face, but seem paralyzed from taking sufficient action. To break this impasse, we must double down on human development to tackle disadvantages and support people's empowerment. We must also recognize and treat the global mental health crisis that undermines human development, and recognize the polarization that is more deeply dividing us, making collective responses harder. Uncertainty has unsettled our lives, but it can also broaden our horizons. It can challenge us to rethink what was once thought impossible, to chart a new course for humanity. Policies that focus on the 3 I's can be powerful tools. We need to invest in the capabilities people need to thrive. Ensure so that everyone is protected in an uncertain world. And innovate technologically, economically, and socially to respond to whatever challenges come next. We must re-examine assumptions to develop a wider set of policy options needed to navigate uncertainty, to unlock human potential, and to protect the planet, and provide people with the tools they need to feel more secure and have hope for the future. This is human development. There is promise and peril in uncertainty. Tipping the scales towards hope is up to us.
And see the slides? Okay, very good. I'm going to minimize this and get started. Welcome, colleagues. My name is Tasneem Mirza. I'm an economist with UNDP working with the Human Development Report Office. I was also just working on the Multidimensional Poverty Index, the global report, which we just launched in October. And today I will be talking about the Human Development Report that was launched in September this year. This report that focuses on uncertain times, unsettled lives, is a third in the series of reports that our office has been producing. In 2019, we worked on a report on inequalities. And after that, in 2020, we worked on a report on human development in context of the Anthropocene, which are the dangerous planetary changes that humans are driving, and how can we strengthen human development in that context. So building on those reports, and also the human security report, which was a special report we worked on this year, that showed that 6 out of 7 people are feeling insecure in various aspects of their life. This is the final report on this series that we produced this year is on this topic, uncertain times and unsettled lives, and how can we shape our future in a world in transformation. And I'll talk a little bit about this now, followed by my colleague from the statistics team, who will elaborate more on the Human Development Index. So the first sentence of this report is, we live in a world of worry. This is something that we are seeing everywhere, that levels of distress has increased over time. So approximately 35% of the people express feelings of distress, including stress, sadness, anger, and worry across the world. And that is 10 percentage points higher than what we observed a decade before. And this is also true across all levels of education, and people from low and high HDI countries are experiencing this kind of distress. We also observe that mental health disorders are on the rise. 1 out of 8 people suffer some sort of mental health disorder, according to the World Health Organization, as you can see in this chart. And this is also 10 percentage points higher than what we observed a decade before. This is obviously a huge tragedy for people who are experiencing it, and limits their ability to live the lives that they have reason to value, and inhibits their full human potential. We also saw that for the first time since we have started calculating the Human Development Index, which was from the year 1990, what we see is in the last 2 years, we have seen reversals at a scale not seen before. As you saw in the video, 9 out of 10 countries experience decline in HDI. This is much higher than what we observed in the last few decades, even during the global financial crisis, when we saw approximately 1 out of 10 countries seeing reversal. So this is huge and unprecedented. And now globally, we are at the level of 2016 of global HDI. Now, based on this data and these observations that we see, what we are saying is that we are in a largely uncertain world. And this has been very much clear in context of COVID, where we saw reversals not only in health, but major impacts on our economy, on education. We are also seeing how the war in Ukraine is affecting us across the world in terms of higher food prices, higher fuel prices. So there are major experiences of uncertainty in everyone's life. But this is also not to say that the world is more uncertain than before, because we've always had wars and pandemics and natural disasters and floods that various societies have to cope with. But what we are saying here is that on top of the existing layers of uncertainty, we are observing some new kinds of uncertainty. And together that's creating an uncertainty complex. So what are these new kinds of uncertainty, which is what the report elaborates on? And the first is the fact that we're in context of the Anthropocene, where humans are driving dangerous changes in the planet. For the longest time, we have enjoyed a stable climate on Earth, but this is no longer going to be the case. Scientists believe this is the beginning of the world's sixth mass extinction. We have already lost 70% of the species on Earth, and so we have an existential question moving forward, and this is creating a new kind of uncertainty that we haven't experienced before. A second kind of uncertainty comes from the fact that we are going to have to reduce our carbon footprint and move our economies to a lower carbon path. And this would require major transformations in our societies, in the ways we use energy, in the ways we use material. And some say this change would be as significant as the change from agricultural societies to industrial societies. And with that comes new kinds of uncertainties, which I'll talk about in a bit. And a third kind of uncertainty that we're observing, new kind of uncertainty that we're observing, is the fact that our societies are getting more divided and more polarized. And part of this comes from the fact that how we use the digital world, how we access information, and how we manage its overflow of information that's coming towards us. In many cases, misinformation, which creates differences in views across people, creating a more polarized world. So all these three various kinds of uncertainties are overlaying on existing uncertainties and creating a more complex world for us. Now, I was just talking about how our world is becoming more polarized. And in this chart, we see that as the level of human insecurity increases in a society, the people are likely to become more polarized. As you can see, the red bars on the extremes are increasing. We also see that globally, only 30% of the people think that most people can be trusted, which is at its lowest recorded value. So mistrust is increasing. And as a result of this polarization and mistrust, we are having more division in society, which is making it more difficult for us to cooperate, to work together towards some of our shared goals and objectives. At its most extreme, when we have division in society, it leads to violent conflict. Globally, 1.2 billion people in the world are affected by conflict. We are also seeing major backsliding of our democracy. We are seeing that more extreme governments are brought into office. And this is having, again, an effect on how we can cooperate as societies. Now, I want to talk a little bit about one of the new kinds of uncertainties, which is the uncertainty of moving towards a low carbon path. This is a huge transition that the world has to take. Consider, for example, the energy in the energy sector, how we're moving towards renewables. Globally, we're moving very fast toward the adoption of renewables, but this transition brings new kinds of uncertainty for us. Consider, for example, our economies and how our finance sectors are tied. A lot of our long-term investments are tied to carbon-intensive industries. And so as we make a deliberate policy choice to move away from carbon, it's going to have major impacts across finance and the economy. Many countries are now seeing the importance of investing in climate-related financial risk management. For example, Joe Biden has the latest executive order in the USA for these CRFRs so that investors are better informed about where their funds are going. Also, where we will land in the future with regards to emissions depends on what scenarios pan out. Whether we're, as you can see in this chart, whether we're in a stated policy scenario versus a scenario where governments meet the announced pledges, versus in a scenario more ambitious, which is the net zero emissions scenario. So depending on which of these scenarios pan out, the amount of emissions will be significantly different, as you can see in this chart. And we also see that even when there are political commitments and the commitments, for example, the countries make in their nationally determined contributions, there are many challenges with implementation of those commitments. Consider, for example, the challenges we are facing with the removal of fossil fuel subsidies. In every country, it's widely accepted that we should eventually remove these fossil fuel subsidies, but there has been many backlash in terms of being successfully able to execute it. And globally, we also do not have a set target date by which all fossil fuel subsidies would be eliminated. So there are many challenges with implementation. There is also the issue of climate justice. Many households, particularly in the lower income group, feel that the transition of the energy sector imposes a higher cost burden on them. And oftentimes it's not fair. We have seen protests across Europe in the last few years. And this is something we have to manage as we make these transitions. The transition to renewable energy also has a very high mineral footprint. So to build the solar panels and the wind turbines, we need significant amount of metals and minerals. And this means that mining has to increase by 4 times or even more in the coming years. And this exacerbates already existing challenges with mining. For example, many of our key biodiversity areas overlap with mining areas, and so there's a threat to further biodiversity loss. And also many of the mining comes from African countries and also conflict-affected countries. So we'll have to manage this in a proper way. So these are some of the challenges we face with regards to transitioning our energy sector. So this is not to say, the report does not say that uncertainty only brings challenges, but in fact, it actually also opens new doors. And we have seen this very clearly in context of COVID, for example. We were able to come up with a vaccine in record time and distribute that globally. We have also shifted our behavior and norms during COVID times, which was unprecedented. Also, the way we were able to execute fiscal policies and monetary policies, cash transfers, for example, or debt relief programs. Some of this created new reference points because we never thought we will be able to go as far as we did. Also, there are many new opportunities and technology that could enable us for future transformations, whether it's in the area of artificial intelligence or genetic editing or nuclear fusion. There's a lot of promise for us. If we can break open these, we could really create many opportunities for us. Now, the report talks quite a bit about this point that over time, we have seen consistently human development to increase. In fact, in the research, we say that from the 1950 onwards, it has been a hockey stick curve in terms of how human has made progress in various aspects of life, whether it's in education, health, technology. So our species have done better and better and better over time. But in recent years, as I was showing some of the charts, in the last 10 years, we see people have, despite of this huge progress in HDI, people are feeling more distress and anxiety and sadness. And why is that the case? Why do we have this contradiction? And the report attempts to try to find an explanation behind it. One of the things we observe is that our data has focused quite a bit on the well-being achievements. For example, in HDI, we calculate how much a person attains in terms of education, health, income, right? But in the human capability approach, we believe that people value things beyond that. So agency matters and freedom matters to them. For example, a person might be willing to give up going to school or give up a job because of the values they hold for climate change. And this would reduce their well-being, but it will enhance their freedom. And so what we're trying to say is many of our indicators do not reflect this aspect of agency and freedom, and also people's emotions, which contributes to human well-being. And so therefore, perhaps this is part of the blind spot why we are seeing this contradiction in data, where we are seeing growing distress and anxiety across the world. In our policy toolbox, we often assume, in economics, for example, we often assume people behave rationally, right? So people will respond to price mechanisms. For example, if we have a carbon pricing implemented, people would respond to those price mechanisms and behave rationally. But in fact, in reality, many other factors determine people's choices and their behavior. For example, emotions play a role. The cultural context they come from plays a role. The social norms play a role. And so there are many other factors that influence why people hold some values, some beliefs, and why they're undertaking some actions and why they're not undertaking some other actions. And so what we try to say in this report is that when we only assume the rational choice model, we are in a way limiting ourselves. And so in this report, we move towards behavioral sciences and try to understand much more broadly what other factor influences people's decision making. And perhaps that may be a way through which we can understand that better and find ways to strengthen individual agency and collective societal agency that can enable us to take action at scale. So in this report, we talk about potential levers of change, and this goes beyond changes that need to take place in terms of how we can adapt our institutions in a highly uncertain world, but also it talks a lot about the cultural mismatches that are there and how we need to better understand the values people hold, beliefs they hold, the cultural context they come from, and what really determines this culture and what really determines social norms, and how can we adapt these or take care of these in a way so that we can move towards the preferred future we would like to move towards. A few years ago, this journalist, David Wallace, wrote an article in New York Times about a world in its possibly a worst case scenario where the temperature increases by 5 degrees Celsius. And he describes a world that is catastrophic with more extreme events. There is famine, there is conflict, and so forth. Now, just last week, he wrote another article, and here he says that in a way, the world has averted that worst case scenario of a 5 degree Celsius increase in temperature and is now on course to rise temperature from 2 degrees, between 2 degrees and 3 degrees Celsius. So this says something about how far we have come, what we have avoided in our collective fight against climate change, what countries have done to lower emissions and change that scenario. So this kind of tells us that, in fact, where we go in the future is very much up to us. We can imagine and create futures in which both people and planet can thrive. And this is one of the main messages of this report, but also the last 3 reports that we have produced. We try to emphasize this point on human agency, human freedom, and our ability to navigate and live the lives that we have reason to value. And if we can strengthen that, then we can work much better towards some of our common goals. So I'm going to end my talk here and hand over to my colleague Yu-Chieh, who will present to you some of the data.
Okay, thank you, Tasneem. Hello, everyone. My name is Yu-Chieh Su, I work at the stat team of HDRO. And now I'm going to present the latest update of our human development metrics and also the new data and statistics that we published in this year's report. So as many of you already knew, in the very first report in 1990, the Human Development Index was introduced as a very simple composite measure of a nation's average health, education, and income. So the HDI is developed to challenge the idea that a nation's progress can only be assessed by its economic growth. And the HDI is designed to provide a composite measure of human progress, which builds around the capability approach, the idea that people have the freedom to live the life they want to. In the past 32 years, new and additional indexes had been developed by our offices and added to the report to complement the HDI in order to capture out the key dimension of human development and to more accurately identify those groups falling behind, also to more timely monitor the distribution of human development. So the HDI is constructed to measure basic capabilities along these three human development dimensions: health, education, standard of living. The health dimension has life expectancy at birth as the component. The education dimension currently is with two components: expected schooling and mid-year schooling. And the last dimension has GNI per capita. The current methodology has been kept stable since the 2010 report. So in the 2021-2022 Human Development Report, the HDI is calculated for 191 countries. So this time we have two additional new countries that are San Marino and Tuvalu. And from this update, we find that first, globally, the HDI value drops 2 years in a row in recent years. And here we see a total decline of about 0.9% in the HDI value over the 2 years during the pandemic. So this decline breaks the positive historical trend, which shows a continuous improvement in human development since 1990. Moreover, we see that the decline in HDI is almost universal. Here we find that more than 90% of countries saw their HDI value decline over the 2 years during the pandemic. And what's worse, more than 40% of countries saw their HDI value continues to decline in both years. However, still there are countries we see they managed to keep and continue the progress. For example, Bangladesh, Australia, and Tuvalu, in these countries, we find that their HDI value still slightly increased in both 2020 and 2021. But the drop in the HDI has been uneven and the recovery has been partial. The pandemic worsened inequalities in human development. The low and medium human developed countries suffer larger loss in the HDI than high and very high human countries. Almost all countries saw the reversal in the HDI in the first year during the pandemic, but the majority of the very high human countries managed to reverse the trend, while most low, medium, high human countries continue to see their HDI decline in 2021. So this created a new inequality crisis. Through 2020 and 2021, the gap between OECD and other regions widened. And here we see a wide variation across countries. First, we see East Asia and the Pacific countries suffer relatively little loss in both years. OECD and Europe and Central Asia countries suffered loss in 2020, but rebounded in 2021. Arab states were stable in 2021 after a drop in 2020. On the other hand, Latin America and the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia countries continue to see their HDI deteriorate in both 2020 and 2021. So this unprecedented loss to the HDI was mostly driven by the continuing hit on life expectancy at birth. Globally, life expectancy dropped from 73 years in 2019 to 72.3 years in 2020. And then it fell further to 71.4 years in 2021. At the same time, national income, GNI per capita, which were hit hard in the first year during the pandemic, had managed to rebound almost back to the level before the pandemic in 2021. So to complement the HDI in our report, we also have 5 additional composite indexes to capture other key dimensions of human development, including gender, inequality, poverty, and planetary pressure. Because we already have a session on the MPI, so now I'm going to focus on these 4 indexes, and I'll give you a brief introduction and then show you the new findings. The first gender index is this Gender Development Index. The GDI is designed to measure the difference in human development achievement between women and men in these 3 basic human development dimensions: health, education, standard of living. So exactly the same as the HDI. This GDI is a direct measure of gender gap in the HDI. So we know a GDI value of 1 represents gender parity, and the closer the GDI is to 1, the smaller the gender gap. Notice for this index, we do not rank countries. Instead, countries are grouped into 5 GDI groups by the absolute deviation from gender parity. From the latest result, we find that worldwide, the average female HDI is 4.2% lower than the average male HDI in 2021. And similar as the finding for the HDI, where we saw the recent value drops 2 years in a row, here we find that globally, the total loss in HDI over 2020 and 2021 was 0.8% for women and 1% for men. So this slightly closed the gender gap during the pandemic, but for the wrong reason. It's mainly because men's human development fared worse than women. At the global level, the gender gap in the HDI is mainly due to women's lower income and educational attainment in many countries. At the regional level, the smallest gender gap in the HDI is in Latin America and the Caribbean, and largest in South Asia. Among all GDI countries, Yemen is with the largest gender gap, where women's HDI is not even 50% of men's in 2021. The second gender index is this Gender Inequality Index. This GII is designed to measure gender inequalities in empowerment. It shows the loss in potential human development due to inequalities between female and male achievement in these 3 major dimensions: reproductive health, empowerment, and labor market. This GII has been seen as a great innovation when first introduced in the 2010 report. First, introduced this reproductive health dimension with 2 components: maternal mortality ratio and adolescent birth rate. Second, for empowerment, it goes beyond literacy and primary education and focuses on political and educational empowerment. Lastly, it includes labor force participation rate in the 3rd dimensions. So this index has been a very popular index for measuring women's empowerment. From the latest result, the GI shows a lack of improvement, with the world average stagnating at 0.465 for the past 3 years. At the regional level, all regions experienced a decline in the GII, so showing improvement from 2019 to 2020, except for South Asia. And from 2020 to 2021, again, all regions experienced a decline in the GII, except for Arab states and East Asia and the Pacific. If we look at the component, first we see that maternal mortality and adolescent birth rate remain very high in sub-Saharan Africa. And women's share of parliamentary seats varies across regions. Also, the labor force participation rate and the share population with at least some secondary education for women are consistently lower than for men. Other than these two gender indexes, we also have two indexes to capture broadly the loss in human development due to inequality. The first index is this inequality adjusted human development index. So as its name suggests, this IHDI is designed to measure the loss in human development due to inequality in the 3 dimensions of the HDI. So this IHDI accounts for the inequality in the 3 dimensions by discounting each dimension's average value according to its level of inequality. Therefore, the IHDI equals HDI when there's no inequality across people, but the IHDI will be lower than the HDI when inequality increases. For the data used here, the inequality in each dimension is estimated from microdata. First, inequality in life expectancy uses the life tables, and our major data source is the world population prospect from UNDP. Second, inequality in education based on the Meniere schooling, which uses the different household survey data. Inequality in income based on disposable household income or consumption per capita, which again uses different household survey data. For this index, we do not rank countries. What's more informative is to look at the difference, the loss in HDI or HDI rank after the inequality adjustment. So from the latest result, we see worldwide, inequality in the distribution of income is the highest, followed by inequality in education and then health. At the subgroup level, there's an unequal distribution in all areas. So if we look at the loss in HDI due to inequality, on average, low human developed countries had the highest average loss of about 31%. In contrast, very high human developed country had an average loss of 10%. And at the regional level, sub-Saharan Africa countries had the highest average loss, about 30%, while Europe and Central Asia countries had only an average loss of 10%. The latest new addition to our family of composite indexes is this planetary pressure adjusted human development index. This PHDI was first introduced in the 2020 Human Development Report. So this index is designed to adjust the HDI for planetary pressures. The PHDI discount the HDI for the excessive human pressure on the planet to reflect the concern for intergenerational inequality. So this index is computed as the product of HDI and an adjustment factor, which is calculated as 1 minus index of planetary pressures. So when there are no pressures on the planet, ideally, the PHDI equals the HDI. However, as the pressure increase, the PHDI would be lower than the HDI. And in addition to the data used for the calculation of HDI, the PHDI uses CO2 emission per capita and the material footprint per capita for the calculation of planetary pressure adjusted factor. Again, as the IHDI for this index, we do not rank countries. What's more important is to look at the difference, the loss in HDI or HDI rank after the planetary pressure adjustment. From the latest result, we see in 2021, globally, we observed an overall loss of 8.9% when the HDI is adjusted for the planetary pressures. And on average, the planetary pressure from CO2 emission is 4.3 tons, and from material footprint is 12.4 tons. At the regional level, OECD countries had the highest overall loss when the HDI is adjusted for the planetary pressure. And the region experienced the smallest overall loss is Sub-Saharan Africa. For the very high humid countries, we observe a divergence in their PHDI values. Among the 59 very high humid countries, only 7 remain at the same top category after the planetary pressure adjustment. And at the country level, Brunei Darussalam is now the country dropped the most position after the adjustment. It's also the country at the bottom. However, we still observe large improvement in some other countries. For example, Sri Lanka shows the highest improvement in ranking after its planetary pressure are considered for the HDI evaluation. Other than these composite indexes, in the report, we also provide additional data. As previous report, this time, we again publish a series of dashboards to complement the composite indexes for measuring current and future well-being. These 5 dashboards focus on topics on quality of human development, life course gender gap, women's empowerment, environmental sustainability, and social economic sustainability. Lastly, the new gender social norm index that was first introduced in the 2019 report has been updated this time, and it's provided in the chapter 6 of the report. So thank you very much. If you have any additional questions, you can contact us at this email address, or you can visit our new website, the new Human Developed Data Center, for more information. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Or you can stick around and ask questions right now. So
sure, definitely.
There is a Q&A function on your Zoom. Go ahead and use that to the extent you wish. And I want to ask if there's anyone in the room at Oxford who could start us off with questions.
Thank you, James. Yes, we have a question which Sam will answer now.
Hi, thanks so much for the very thorough report. I think that what was sort of clear was that there are these two sort of, opposite effects that we're seeing. So we're seeing, a general increase in well-being, at least on the human development level, or well-being level. But then we're also seeing these very short-term negative effects, as well as these other long-term environmental and kind of psychological effects that are going in the opposite direction. So how best do we communicate this in terms of social discourse? How do we message this in a way that doesn't lead people to giving up, but also recognizes the severity of our problems, as well as the progress that we've made? Sort of how's a quick and easy way to do that? I know there's probably no quick and easy way, but how do we do that without, do this in a nuanced way, in a thoughtful way?
All right, an easy question to start with. So who wants to be the one to answer?
I can respond to that, James. Thank you so much. It's a great question. In fact, this is exactly the question we have been struggling with, is how can we position this and frame it in a way that doesn't cause panic? I mean, it should raise the alarms, but not cause panic, and it should be in a way motivational for people to think of ways to act against it. And this is what we try to do in the report we produced on the Anthropocene context, where we talked about Anthropocene. Let me define it. It's a new geological epoch that geologists are considering defining. It's under debate whether we have moved to this epoch already, because the evidence of it shows in the rocks, which it takes time. But the idea is that the pressures on the planet are so huge that we are transforming the Earth so significantly that we are in this epoch. So over there, we try to frame it slightly differently than how we generally talk about climate change. And there we wanted to say that if humans can make such a big impact on the planet, then it is also in their powers to move it to the preferred future that they would like to. I think this was kind of like the main message that was coming out of it. It was not only to show, like other climate change reports, how quickly we're moving towards higher temperatures or how we are quickly exceeding planetary boundaries, but also to share this thought process that if we strengthen individual agency, if we strengthen collective agency, then together we might be able to take the planet towards where we would like to. I just want to share this very interesting data I was looking at, which is, so if we put the Earth life in a time scale, so the Earth would is 24 hours old, a day old, then humans came in the last 2 seconds. So that's very short. So in that very short time, if we had such a huge impact on the planet with much deliberation and with much cooperative work, we can move it towards a preferred future that we would like to. So in this series of report, we talked extensively about that. And in this year's report, we got into it more deeply. And there is a chapter 3 that talks quite a bit about how people make choices, why they behave in certain ways, why they act on some things, and why they don't act on some things. So we were trying to understand this point that we have been, we know where we need to go. We know that how much we need to control the temperatures by, and how much we need to reduce our emissions. And there is political will, and everybody understands that this is what we're supposed to do. Then why are we not able to achieve it? And so we try to get in the depth of that question and try to understand that. And that took us beyond economics and politics to more like behavioral sciences to understand what determines individual behavior, why they hold certain beliefs, and why they stick to it, what determines cultural repertoires and social norms, and how can we change that. For example, in a particular city, like the move from commuting to bicycles, a cultural shift, how did that happen? So we try to explore lots of examples of where we have been very successful. For example, on the ozone layer depletion, this was such a big issue, a communal issue, and how did we address it? So we try to identify where there has been successes, and going forward, how can we work more cooperatively for more successes in the future. If you read chapter 3, it's far more interesting than what I've just described.
No, that was a clear description. Kellyanne, do you have anything else on the ground in Oxford?
Currently, no questions on the ground. Thank you, James.
So I'll have a question to just break the ice, if you don't mind. It appears that one of the ways that the Human Development Report Office is trying to build off of the success of the HDI is to provide related indices, which are basically discounting for various factors that are not good. One might argue that inequality is not good, although you could argue that certain forms of inequality are quite good. But still, the fact that it's overall not a great thing attracts a lot of people. So therefore, inequality adjusted, the measure that was built up by Miguel Sacoli and Luis Felipe Lopez Calva in their paper, it now allows us to make a comparison if we take into account these negative aspects. And likewise with the other new measure that you have had. One of the ways that websites have gone is to allow people to plug and chug. They can say, here's what my weight is for this particular aspect of the measure. Or they can say, I really would like to discount by this, which I feel is very bad. You can see this, of course, on the Better Life Index. You can see it on the Better Jobs Index at the Inter-American Development Bank. Basically, they allow people themselves to play with the data online. Is this a way that you all are going? Because it just seems like lots of fun for people who want to explore their world through data.
Okay, I can provide some reflection on this question. So I think our office has been trying to also develop tools that can allow people to do this assessment by themselves, depending on their needs. And I think this approach is another way that other agency has provided to capture different important dimension that's important for their work. It could be on the well-being, the happiness of their life, or other key issues. But I think the best part of the human metrics that we provide here is that it's based on this framework of human development. And we start with this, we think about the evaluation according to this 3-dimension framework that based on human approach, capability approach. And in some sense, it's like all these index, even though they specifically focus on different area, but at the end is a general evaluation, a multi-dimensional way to look at what's the progress of human development. And also compared to those kind of tool or more flexible way of indexes or measures, I think this global composite index we've all been working on, it's important to provide a more standardized way of evaluation. And that could be also used for cross-country over time, over years comparison. So yeah, I think both tools are all important and they all have pros and cons. But at this time, I think our work, all this index, HDI, GDI, and MPI, it is still very important for the development work.
Okay, great. Well, to just continue with that question, the reason we can have other indices or other ways of looking at reality is because we have better data. And up until now, the SDG promise of a data revolution has gone nowhere. From your point of view as being someone in data or someone in the office itself who's trying to communicate to folks, what's going on? Are we going to be stuck here?
Okay. I think this is also a very great question. As a statistician and also a data user, because our office, we don't produce this international statistics. We are also users of all this UN data that are included in the SDG. I think no matter what, I've observed a huge progress since the SDG effort started. And if we look back, way back to 1990, when we first, the HDI, or the HDI statistics compilation, the MDG, it's a huge progress for us to collect all kinds of different data. And yeah, I think take a look at the gender statistics area. Like still 5 years ago, we don't, I think when we just started the SDG, many of the target indicator we barely have enough data, and up to now already I believe all the goals and target within the goal 5 have established methodology, and all of the indicator has graduated to tier 1 or 2. And the data has been regularly collected at the country level. So there are progress, and even though it's not as fast as we have thought, but I think if we can still keep the progress, eventually we can get to the point that we have sufficient and good enough quality of data to measure different issues. And I think so far the biggest improvement has been on those emerging issues we've talked about many years in our report on violence against women, on time use, and all other important aspects in the gender gap, gender issues in work and employment. So yeah, to celebrate is good. At the same time, we also need to reflect what to improve for more. And I'm sure with the new technology, we have the way to get more better data through AI or some deep learning. And for sure, we can also find other better way to improve the current way of data collections.
All right, thank you, Tasneem. Did you have any comment also on that, or I'll turn it over to Kyle to ask another question?
No, I think Yu-Chieh described it very appropriately, that we have made progress in some areas, but of course we also are behind in so many. Maybe I can just share quick examples from my just recent experience. When we launched the MPI, we had a separate section on the call for data because the MPI, again, is an indicator that we produce based on other data that's collected and the international data that's collected for household level micro data by UNICEF and USAID, the DHS, the Demographic Household Surveys, and the mix. And we explained how we didn't see much of an increase in the frequency of that data collection after 2015, although we should expect to see such an increase. And instead, during COVID times, we saw a decrease of the frequency of the household surveys collected. As a result, we can't assess very clearly what happened in the ground during COVID, and this is a huge roadblock. But I want to share this other example where I was working on analysis of the impact of the war of Yemen in partnership with University of Denver. They have an international futures modeling platform, and they have a lot of interesting data there that look at different aspects of the SDGs. And together, UNDP did a project to look into what were some of the impacts of the war, and if the war continues another 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, how much Yemen would go back in human development. And there we complemented this kind of long-term SDG focused data. So data on economy, health, education, environment, many aspects this model collects. But we complemented with UN data recently collected from Yemen on the impact of war. And this looked into the impact of war in terms of mortality directly from the conflict and violence, but mortality also due to famine and lack of access to food because some of their ports were closed, and how that translated into every one person who died from the violent conflict, 5 additional people, mostly children, died due to lack of food. And so this was recent data collected right before COVID to show the impacts of that war. And we integrated that to the model and kind of looked into what would happen to Yemen, how many years they're going behind in human development and progress as a result of this war, which was picked up by media. There was a lot of interest. And I just wanted to share that example because I thought it was fascinating that while this conflict was still ongoing, they were able to collect this very good data. So yes, we make some small progresses, but then again, we are behind in so many. I will hand over to our other colleagues for questions.
All right, I see a question that is being put forward by Kyle Renner.
Yes, hi. I was wondering, I was struck by the fact that you used ensure as one of your 3 I's. And in particular, I was wondering if that meant that you had taken into account the impact or influence of the insurance industry in your various indices and in this report. In particular, I'm thinking about the challenge to climate change adaptation if insurance companies are unwilling or unable, perhaps, to engage in certain markets given risks and the viability of low-income countries to pay for insurance of infrastructure or humans to survive in locations that are going to be at greater risk of environmental disasters. So I was just wondering if you could maybe expound on that, and I was wondering if there was some direct link between your use of the term and the role that you anticipate the insurance industry will need to play to reduce inequality, to provide for a more viable future. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. That's a great question. It's a relevant question. So in the report, we talk at the very broad level, and we talk about insurance because of the need, as you say, the impacts of climate change and how people who live in certain areas would be strongly affected. And in many cases, there's no insurance at all. Even basic health insurance, there isn't in most developing countries. We saw this, how it impacted in context of COVID, health-wise, but also financially. And so what do we do about that? How can we ensure better the lives of the people in lower HDI countries is what we focused on. And we also talked a little bit about how, for example, mental health, access to insurance for mental health, or just access to support for mental health, which is primarily missing in large part of the world. There's no acknowledgement or recognition, and due to various constraints, people are not able to access, and so oftentimes they go undiagnosed. And what are the implications of that? So in terms of what's covered in the report, it's kind of broad policy areas that needs further work. But at UNDP, we're also working with insurance industry. So there's a private sector arm that works with insurance companies, and currently we're in consultation with them. And we have a consultation that we're just planning on engaging with like the CEOs of these insurance companies to understand some of, for them to see what we reflected in the report in terms of some of the areas where insurance is largely lacking in some parts of the world, and where there's opportunity for market, but also kind of, like you point out, the threats to the insurance industries themselves because of the volatility of the climate. And yeah, so we partner with other parts of UNDP who are working more closely with these insurance industries and identify areas for collaboration. We kind of brainstorm to see what they're thinking about and what are the emerging issues we're working on. What does the data say? Where can they potentially find markets, and maybe their feedback to us of what can be done and can't be done. So kind of creates opportunities for creative imagination and exploration as we work with them.
All right, so let's see if we have questions in the Oxford room.
Hi, James, thank you. No questions here at this point in time.
Okay, well, I'm glad that it was so clear for them. I'll be happy to turn it over once again to Kyle if he has a new question, or otherwise to bring it to a close. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I do have another question. I was wondering about some of the maybe structural transformation pieces that I think are really connected here. And in particular, I was wondering if you could talk about market forces and how you how the team either sees market forces as being viable options for structural transformation, or if you find them unlikely to continue to reduce or to improve human development indicators at the same trajectory that they've been on. So you mentioned the hockey stick earlier. Well, we've seen the curve of the hockey stick at the end starting to take shape. Do you anticipate that you will be able to go back to a situation in which the market and the drivers of the economy continue to reduce or improve, I should say, continue to improve human development indicators? Or do we need to ask market actors very large market actors to modify their industries in order for us to be able to return to that upward trajectory. And if we do have to ask them to make some transformative changes, what is the incentive? What is the business or market incentive for them to do so?
Thank you, Kyle. I think you go to the heart of the problem when you ask this question. This is precisely what we have been thinking about. Just as an example, this debate on whether GDP is the right measure for progress in countries. It has been there for a very long time. And from the 1960s, I think they have been starting to ask whether it is the right indicator for countries to measure in terms of progress. And part of the work of Human Development Index is just that, to go beyond it and to include other indicators which people value. We have also been in conversation with UNEP on their inclusive wealth measure. That is another alternative that looks into the wealth of a nation beyond GDP, which basically GDP is different from the wealth in the sense that it measures the total goods and services produced in a country in a year. So it's a flow variable, it's not a stock variable that accumulates over time. So while GDP in many countries have been increasing, we see a decline in natural wealth. And so the Inclusive Wealth Initiative of UNEP is to bring in this natural wealth and talk about whether countries are able to accumulate that over time, or are we losing it over time, is the point Yu-Chieh was mentioning about intergenerational equity. So as we hand over our nation to future generations, are they seeing a decline in natural wealth in terms of clean air, clean water, other natural resources that a country has? So the issue with that is, again, data, and maybe Yu-Chieh can elaborate further. But how can we better measure natural wealth? What are the limitations of measuring it? Are all countries collecting this kind of data? So what are the alternatives? And so this is kind of like an ongoing exploration of HDRO, is to explore how can we better measure, what are the measures that would be more reflective of the kind of development priorities we have. And so I feel like the work that we have been doing is to bring in new ideas to shift the way we think. So for the longest time, the narrative has been growth. And so how can we change that narrative and bring into perspective other challenges we're seeing globally, and that is affecting us all across, whether we're in low income or high income countries. And so how can we tackle this better? Market incentives you measure. Obviously, these are very difficult, but from what we are seeing and showing you in the data is that while we are making progress in income and related indicators and consumption and material wealth has gone up, but literature is in behavioral sciences more is saying that although people's wealth and material wealth has gone up, their happiness or well-being has been on the decline. And so what are we doing wrong? I think this is the kind of narrative that we're trying to bring to the picture. Obviously, eventually this needs to be translated into how do we then change market forces and what can be done. But I think this is where we're going. We don't have all the answers yet. Yu-Chieh, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to add it a little bit, I think this new measure of the PHDI is the first step. We want to try to measure what Tasneem just described, the work we've been starting in the 2020 report. And the point, like we want to have a good measure that can help us reflect the connectedness between social, economic, and the planetary system. So in the 2020 report, I think we are not only just look at the climate change, temperature going, we are talking about the whole system of planet and the human developed environment, the earth and human. So the purpose to develop this PHDI is try to provide the incentive for transformation as we describe in the report. And so if we plot the HDI and PHDI, the most important thing we find, there's an empty box, like very few or probably none countries so far have achieved very high human development and low planetary pressure. So the purpose of the PHDI is trying to guide the countries to move toward that empty box of human development, where we can achieve very high human development and low planetary pressures at the same time. So yeah, this is a new index that we just developed 2 years ago, and right now we try to get the best quality indicator we can get so far, CO2 emission, material footprint, but I'm sure there are many other indicators that would be helpful for this more comprehensive evaluation. But yeah, I think this is the way we would like to try to move toward for the measurement side.
Okay, well, great. Thank you all so much. I think that's probably time to bring it to a close. So to all our speakers, thank you so much. For the people in the audience in Oxford and online, appreciate your being here. Until next time next week. Bye-bye now.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.